My name's Kaleem Aftab. I'm here to moderate the BAFTA session sound. I'm going to start from the far side. We have representing Bridge of Spies, Richard Hims and Drew Kunin. And representing Mad Max, we have Gregg Rudloff and Mark Mangini. Can you guys talk about the general soundscape of the film and your approach to Bridge of Spies?
It's interesting the way it works sound-wise because it begins with this very rich, elegant mix of just atmospheric sounds of the city of New York in the 50s. Probably 10 minutes, 12-minute section of the film with no dialogue at all. And once they start speaking, which happens about 10 minutes in, they pretty much never stop talking. It's a very, very, so from my end, it was a very wordy script. It was a lot of dialogue, a lot of information.
Can you tell me a bit about your own roles on the film and how you work together?
We've never met, because Drew is
moments ago.
He's production recorder, so he's on from day one of shooting, and I come on after the first edit is pretty much done. So there's a big world apart. Of late, Mr. Spielberg's very concerned about production sound. He doesn't like ADR and he didn't want to replace any lines. And so they went to some extreme lengths on that film of dubiously giving me the honor of checking this production sound, which makes us enemies immediately. Who wants to have their work inspected, you know? They also gave us the power to call up and say the wardrobe needs to move the mic, stuff that was, historically never allowed. So since then, every film I get to listen to the dailies, and I had to listen to Drew's dailies. Of course, I'm powerless. All I can do is say, this sounds a bit weird, because they don't give me picture as well. So I'm listening to sound and critiquing without no idea whether the mic was within 5 feet of the actor or a half a mile. We ended up recording, I think, 28 ADR lines, and not all of those were used, which is pretty extraordinary.
Considering how much dialogue there was. But Stephen is invested in wanting to get good sound, but it is problematic depending where you are, what you're doing. We shot almost all real locations. We weren't on stages. On a built set, on a sound stage, it's much easier to get cleaner, isolated tracks because you're in an artificial environment, whereas we had almost no sets. In the interior of the cockpit of the plane, and there were very few. It's difficult to shoot, particularly in New York when there's no traffic outside and you can't control anything. And also being a period film, the sounds aren't period correct. The sirens aren't, that you have today didn't exist in the 1950s. Also, there's a difficult thing when you use multiple cameras. As you can see here, you have multiple cameras shooting simultaneously, but if you have a wide shot and a tight shot, and you can't really get the microphone into where you need. Luckily, we could talk to Stephen and say, this is really important, can I get in here? He appreciates the value of what we can do, and he's extremely cooperative and clever to trying to make that happen, so it's good. I'd never been to that corner before. I shot it in Queens. It's like perfectly period correct. You could look 4 directions. You can see down every block, and it looks right for the 50s. But then we had to clear everything away, and then we had a lot of cooperation from the city, and they were able to stop traffic a block away in each direction. So still there's the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway is not far from there. So we got a little bit lucky with the time of day we shot that bit.
And in terms of the sounds, getting the fan right?
Well, that was production effects, but they've added a lot of lovely atmosphere. That's what I liked so much about that whole opening.
It's all blended. The 57 Chevy that goes by, the one that I'd selected, was recorded originally on Crystal Skull, and it had a bit of a slightly beefy sound on it, like slightly hot rod, so we blended yours with ours.
Yeah.
And there's a manhole cover thing in there that was barely there in the end. It was irritating.
Right, because if they go over the manhole covers, it's the car rolled over.
The brake squeak was added, and I think the car that comes in is actually a Plymouth, and we actually went and recorded that from a collector's car. The usual thing, the battery went flat as soon as we went to start it, and the sound crew ended up pushing it down the road at Skywalker to get it started. The tinging fan was something that Gary particularly liked, rather than the clean fan or particularly period fan. Just wanted that tinging sound and all.
Which is great. I love
the
that.
Foley
Little things,
details
yeah.
of the coin, and it's very delicate stuff. And the couple arguing across the hall in the New York apartment, and then the violin scales being played, and people walking upstairs with heavy but muffled feet. All that stuff all sort of gives it that feel of New York.
Excellent. I'm going to go to Mad Max. Mark, Greg, can you talk about your respective roles on the film and how you work together?
I'm the Mad Max equivalent of Richard Hims. I'm the supervising sound editor, and I'm also here with my co-nominee, David White, who is our sound designer. He's here in the front row. And my job is to record, edit, design, all the sounds that you will hear, much like Richard just talked about, all these lovely little details that create a scene, and then provide them to Gregg to mix them to create a finished and fleshed out proper soundtrack.
What were the particular challenges of Mad Max?
I mean, as you can imagine, this is an incredibly dense film sonically as well as visually. So the challenge was the sheer enormity and capturing and editing that much sound. But I think our real success, and Gregg will speak to this in more detail, was in a movie that is arguably going to be a loud movie, how do we control that much sound so that there's always focus and there's always a narrative thread with sound? Because the film visually is quite dense. You know, Johnny Seale's frame is unbelievably populated, and there are times I really believe it is the sound that's helping give you focus. The sound kind of tells you where to look and is telling a bit of the story, because as you know, there's only about 3 words in our entire film. Max grunts most of the time. And so it is often sound that's helping tell the story along with the visuals.
There's 2 avenues toward that. The first one, as we were talking about it, it's what we refer to as a full track. There's much information being given to the audience at any one time. We have to make sure there's clarity there. It can become very muddled if you play everything all the time. It just turns into a mush, and the audience can just be numbed to that. But most importantly, our director, George Miller, really wanted sound to be telling the story. And for him, at any moment in the film, there's one sound that is the most important sound, and he would refer to that as top of the pyramid. So there's this constant evolution of sounds and transitions from one sound to another, and the challenges were to make those transitions without being obvious about it, but making sure that the audience focus by the use of this sound was telling the story point that George wanted told at any particular moment in the film.
If you take the chase at the end of the film, it's a 20-minute long chase across the desert that ends the film. In real life, it would have been a cacophony. You have diesel engines roaring, you have explosions, you have weaponry, you have screaming and yelling and shouting. And in real life, if that had actually occurred, it would have been 20 minutes of ear bleed. So what Gregg's referring to is that at any given moment in that 20 minutes, we are constantly doing a weave to create that focus, to find the one sound, or maybe 2 sounds that help tell the story and allows the audience's ears to breathe a little bit.
We're not going back.
We start with a spanner banging on the side of an air filter on a machine. That's a very realistic sound, or diegetic if you want to. It's source generated within the story. but we're then transitioning from that into music and the drums. It's just showing some of the transitions that we make between source-generated sounds and sounds that are only there for the audience and the mood that that will help create, the arc of emotion that the filmmaker may be looking for at that point in time. It was important for George to use sound to help sell the point of view of the Max character. He's basically subhuman at the beginning of the film. He's lost his family, he feels responsible, he can't deal with it, he's crazy. So now he has to start to try to re-engage a bit with humanity. We called it Max's headspace. Sounds are hyper-realistic. They're very focused to what his focus is at that point of time. When his focus shifts, the sound shifts. When you're dealing with other characters, that headspace goes away, but now we're back to realistic sounds. So this is a constant palette of sounds that are changing, trying to get transitions that work for the moment but don't distract the audience. And David White did a fabulous job in this area.
It's interesting hearing you guys talk about your challenges and all this dialogue you were able to use. We had the opposite situation. We had real vehicles that had to be believable vehicles. These are all functioning cars with full-on massively noisy engines. For the early stages for me, before the ADR was recorded, we had to retain some intelligibility out of those little bits of dialogue. And of course, we're talking about replacing a lot of the sound because shooting with so many vehicles, so many different camera angles, you can't really get a smooth transition from one massive car to another one. But yes, the sound recording challenges I think we really need to hear about from Ben here because of the opposite of yours.
The main challenge was actually getting George to hear dialogue from 8 cast in a big tanker travelling at 60, 80 plus kilometres an hour off the road. And sometimes some of the vehicles were about 110 dB. I put in-ears on, for example, Immortan, we put a mic inside his mask and he had in-ears. George was in another vehicle. We were filming with the edge arm, travelling down low and then coming back up to a close-up at the same time, and there's a stunt driver actually driving the vehicle, but Hugh Keys-Byrne, the actor, had to turn around and have a look at a particular time. So George was in another vehicle maybe 500 metres away. I was travelling somewhere else. So we had to design a system for everybody to be able to hear each other and communicate, and that was one of my big missions to do. And on top of that, I was recording the vehicles on the fly. So it was all happening for 6 months out in the Namibian desert. So that was a challenge for everybody. But we loved it.
I would like to thank Richard, Drew, Greg, Mark, David and Ben for coming down today. It was very informative. It was great. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the reason I was excited about doing Cinderella was I'd come straight off the back of The Wolf of Wall Street, which were full of testosterone, and the only women in it were, had no clothes on. So it was like, I want to do a girls' film. I want to do a film about girls, for girls. What a great challenge. I've never done a fairy tale before, never done anything, aimed at children either.